Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on today.
We may have a guest with us today. This is Smokey. He frequents my podcast. Today we have Mark Everglade. He is a dystopian author. Some really cool books coming out or already out, right? Kill Sweet Overkill is already out, correct?
It'll be out in about 3 weeks, and
3 weeks.
but the original ones in the series are out at this point.
Okay, fine. Well, I'm excited to dive in. Just, do you want to talk about this book first or your other books first?
I can definitely talk about kind of the overall approach to the series that I've done, I guess.
Okay.
So, yeah, for the past 5 years, I've been writing a sort of cyberpunk meets space opera environmental type fiction. So I was reading NASA's research and on different planets that are similar to Earth, and I found a planet, Glycine 581G, that was almost exactly like Earth, but it's half of the planet is always dark, and half of the planet it's always daytime. And so I started envisioning 5 years ago exactly how those societies would be if you lived in darkness all day long, how that would impact your social relations, the relationship between the light side of the planet and the dark side, the power differential, how the governments would organize and structure on a planet with such large ecological differences. And so basically the series, starting with Hemispheres, following through Inertia, my current book, and the upcoming Kill Switch, the series basically follows a few characters as governments are trying to rotate the planet to change the structure of light on the planet. And by rotating the planet quicker, that leads to all sorts of problems with global warming, flooding, etc. And that's where the dystopian element comes in, is sort of the difference between how corporations and governments are profiting off of environmental destruction and how characters from normal walks of life are trying to set things right again.
Interesting. Yeah, I can imagine a myriad of problems from all of that. I mean, just a world that would be dark all the time would be dystopian enough for me. Not to add, so could you speed up the planet to make the other side light or not really?
Yes, and so it is possible to increase a rotation speed of a tidal locked planet, and you would do so by ejecting certain parts of the atmosphere as mass, for instance, at a certain angle. So think of a balloon, and you filled up the balloon, but it's not tied yet at the end, and you can kind of let out a little bit of air, and you could make that balloon fly through the air. And so that's kind of how you would rotate a planet.
Yeah, because it doesn't have as much mass, it might not have as much gravity, so it would spin faster. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a whole relationship to the spinning, to the gravity, like you're saying, to the electromagnetic structure of the fields, and then that relates how much UV light reaches the planet, and then that causes water to evaporate on one side of the planet where it's daytime, but all the water is on the other side of the planet where it's dark. However, it's usually frozen in the form of ice. So
Oh,
over the
that's
course of the series, yeah, over the course of the series, that ice starts to melt, and it allows me to explore our current problem with global warming, but to do so in a less controversial way by placing it on another planet.
I think fantasy and sci-fi can do those very well because they're a little bit of safe spaces. Talk about those maybe in a way that's not so polarizing, and to help maybe people think about them. Was that your initial goal in writing it, or did you just want to write something fun?
Absolutely. Having that safe space is important because, like cyberpunk literature, about half of people tend to be very conservative libertarians that are into it, and then the other half tend to be extremely liberal progressives, socialists, etc. You don't find too many people who aren't radical in some way that like punk fiction. So
Okay,
you
so
kind of have to
describe so the for listeners who maybe don't know the definition of cyberpunk, describe that for me.
Oh, absolutely. So cyberpunk is a term that came up almost 40, 50 years ago in the early 80s. Bruce Bethke came up with a term, cyberpunk, and he told me he never dreamed that we would be talking about this 4 decades later when he was first writing about teenage hackers and whatnot. And so basically, they were coming out of the Cold War and or being in the Cold War at the time in the early 80s and coming out of the Vietnam War. There was a lot of skepticism towards government. There was a lot of fear, and we felt like we were on the edge of World War III, sort of like we feel now to some degree with threats of Russian and Civil War and et cetera. And so out of that period, you have personal computers emerge, and then in 1993, the internet goes live for the average person to have access to. And there was a lot of fears about how that would change society. So cyberpunk literature comes out in the 80s and basically looks at our relationship to technology and how it impacts our social relations and the power dynamics of how the rich can relate to the poor. For instance, who gets to use the new computers, who has the knowledge to be able to kind of leverage the benefits in the workforce that they give.
Right. Well, now information is everywhere, but you don't know which information is right and which information is wrong. So tell us about your characters.
So my characters, um, I try to follow the same family throughout the series because I like books like Dune, where you get to see intergenerations, grandchildren and children, and have kind of a dynasty there that builds up. But one of my main characters is Ash. In the book Inertia, she is a geologist who's studying the planet and comes up and basically knows too much. She finds out some information about who's profiting off of it, off of the environmental destruction. It puts her life at risk. And so she has to rely on the greatest terraformer, the greatest scientist on the planet to help her. And it's her father, Severum, but Severum doesn't know she exists and she's never met him. And so I try to create a sort of a family tension there where you look at, what's it like for somebody to have to rely on a man who is her father but doesn't know she exists. And basically looking at how the family dynamics change over time. And and so that's one of the way following her throughout the series. I wanted to use a female protagonist because women in cyberpunk literature are pretty much like they're often like Trinity in the Matrix, where they're just dressed up in leather and they're overly sexualized, and that doesn't really do much for to promote women's rights, and it can be rather misogynistic, I find. So I tried to create a less kind of sexualized, strong female character because in the end, we're creating role models, we hope, for the younger generation to follow, and we want people to have a good sense of self.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because one of my first questions sometimes is for either gender writer. If you're writing a different gender character, what was your decision process on that? And so you already answered that question. Fun.
It's very hard to do. It's very hard to
Yeah,
take.
yeah.
Usually tell when a male writer, yeah.
Yeah, I let my husband read mine. So he gets to say whether I did a good job or not. That's kind of scary to speak for all of one gender, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So in Kill Switch Overkill, what set that one up for us?
So basically, it's the antagonist, Sabrina Underfoot, and Sabrina she's basically a genius college student who watches all of her inventions be stolen by the university for profit, and they don't recognize her as a woman for her accomplishments. And we know female scientists have typically been under-recognized for hundreds of years as far as their accomplishments. Even with things like evolutionary theory, only the men get credit. So she doesn't get credit, and the oligarchs on the planet, the totalitarian kind of oligarchy, they see her skills and they take her in, and they use her skills for basically, profit and evil and destruction and whatnot. She's just obsessed with life being a game and wants to be recognized for her genius. And so over time, she notices the destruction that this causes as the planet just floods and basically people are living on islands isolated. And so she decides to react against the system by allying with those people that she used to be against. She kind of has to put her ego aside and realize I may not get a recognition for what I do in life, but if I follow the right path and have good values, then that's half the battle. So
Right. You have to count that as a win for yourself, right?
exactly, and it's a sort of redemption tale. So
So she's an antagonist turned protagonist, actually.
yes, but she has an artificial intelligence that has taken over her the implants in her mind, and the AI tries to convince her to do bad things throughout. And so it's one of those things where the enemy is within you. In the old days, like maybe horror had like this idea of demonic possession, or like there's a character with a demon inside them or something. With cyberpunk, we can make it where it's like an artificial intelligence has hijacked your brain implants and kind of performs the same role of being this kind of demonic influence that you then have to resist.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think was it a Dean Koontz book, maybe in the 80s or early 90s, that like all the computers took over everything. Was that right? Did I get the author right?
No, I think there was because yeah, I read most of Dean Koontz's work and it was amazing. I love how he has. I actually took his structure of many of his books have a female character in one chapter and a male character in the second chapter, and they go back and forth between the two characters. And then at some point, halfway through the book, the characters meet, and it's this big thing. And so I've modeled, that structure at times. I kind of like switching characters every other chapter, like he does. But yeah, his works are all phenomenal.
Fun, yeah. So now I just lost my other question that I had for you. What is your background? Do you have a science background, or do you do tons of research?
I work as a IT program manager with the state, but my background is in sociology. So when you're studying, planets and space and whatnot, you kind of want to write what you know. So I try to minimize the natural science and look more at the social dynamics in my work.
Okay, so this
Being
is
a
not hard sci-fi. This is more the dystopian cultural, where it's not humanity, but where is these people's culture going?
Yes, exactly. You try to focus on that. I have a degree in anthropology as well, so that's kind of what I knew. And how they symbolically construct their culture, their gender norms, their religion. It's fun to build a world.
Fine. So where do you see this going? Are you writing another book in the series?
No, I think this will be it for a while. Following a couple of family tragedies, I'm kind of taking some time to rebuild my family and kind of envisioning what does life look like over the next 5 to 10 years. And I feel like, I have to get that structure down to really be able to create a space where I can create. Sometimes when things happen in life, you go into survival mode, and the arts can be there as a catharsis, but you can also sort of lack the focus to really focus on something like that when you have major things going on in your life.
Yeah, I completely agree. So it's interesting to see, especially interviewing authors starting in 2021. It really seemed like people who were already writing and are already authors stopped writing, and people who hadn't written before started writing. So we had this whole new. I did this during 2020. And I experienced that too. Like I really didn't write. I just watched Vampire Diaries over and over and over, but then yeah, so 2 years ago I lost my sister, and I've been sort of just like frozen. And I'm like, it's okay to be frozen. You're just gonna like figure out what's the next move and move on from there. So completely understand that.
Yes, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah, sorry for yours too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So what you talked about Dean Koontz as maybe a little bit of an inspiration. Who else do you read?
William Gibson, he did the show like Johnny Mnemonic, for instance. That was based on his story. And he did the Peripheral series on Netflix. In addition, people like Neil Stevenson, who wrote Snow Crash and is always being interviewed in Wired magazine. Dr. Melissa Scott and Dr. Dora Raymaker. There's a lot of great female cyberpunk writers that are coming up. Anna Mossacat, Dr. Ren Warham. I find that women really approach the genre a little bit differently. It's a little bit more focused on freedom and gender freedom and basically being able to express different sides of yourself. Um, and they really create a very strong characters in the genre. While a lot of the men create more stereotypical kind of trophy characters or token characters, which don't really drive the genre forward and don't really drive society forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess cyberpunk as a genre could be set in the past, could be set contemporary, it could be set in the future, could be set in our contemporary world, it could be, or not contemporary, but a
Mhm.
human world, I guess, right? Or it could be set in a space world, or like you have it like a dystopian, you know, are they aliens or are they much like us?
Yeah, and it could be set in virtual reality as well. And that's a lot of fun because it's a total playground where you can do anything. Cyberpunk generally today it is not set in space and there's no aliens. But I model
Okay.
mine after the 80s model, in which case many books like Frontera or Schizomatrix were set in space, and they occasionally had aliens. They weren't the focus. But yeah, there was a lot of examples from Michael Swanwick, Vacuum Flowers, classic works that are obscure but are still studied today, where you do find this space element. Um, yeah, it's the genre kind of got away from that and just kind of went with neon cities at night, with the rain coming down, and it became very noir, like Noir. That the noir kind of culture, that genre became synonymized with the way that cyberpunk took off over time. And part of that is traditional gender roles, a lot of violence, a lot of brooding kind of darkness. The warmth was kind of sucked out of the genre.
Well, yeah, yeah, because it feels like it did go like if you think about the Matrix, like
Mm.
a lot of society or people felt dehumanized in that because what the machines were acting as basically sort of our consciousness or something, of that sort. So that's a very dark thing to have basically humanity taken over by these machines or AI or whatever it is at that point. So yeah, that would be a sad thing, and that's a very dark thing. So I guess bringing humanity back into that may be a good thing.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, that's a lot of fun. So if you think about what you want someone to take from, I don't, you can talk about one book or you can talk about your series. What themes would that be, or what would you envision people getting from your work?
The takeaway is, first of all, those who seem like they're opposite to you, that like they're the other group, they're the enemy, could be your ally tomorrow. That when we look at the difference even between liberals and conservatives, most of us want the same things at the end of the day. We want fairness in society, however we, define that. We want to be able to feel safe. We want to raise our children in a way that will have good values for the next generation to follow. We tend to focus, and the media focuses on what's different between them, but people are more united than they think in terms of basic values and expectations of life. All humans have the same needs, the same basic needs of belonging and and love, etc. In addition, I hope that they take away that anybody can change society, no matter their walk of life. William Gibson once wrote a book about this genius hacker who lived in a cardboard box under a bridge. And so, All Tomorrow's Parties, I think it was called. And so, the idea that anybody can be empowered to make a difference. Uh, and society usually was changed by just a small group of people who were really dedicated. And we look at powerful figures like our president or some of the circus show that's going on in politics. And some people seem like they're so grand that they're unstoppable. But at the end of the day, there's 300 million Americans, and and together as a voice, if we were united, we could make a tremendous difference.
Those are some really empowering thoughts, and yeah, that sounds like something people would like to read. Where would we find you in your books?
So I go to book fairs around Tallahassee, Miami, Thomasville, and other areas. However, if you're not in the Southeast, you can also go to markeverglade.com. And on there, you can sign up for my mailing list. There's free short stories that I'll send you. In addition, my contact information is on my about page. you can read about my work a little bit. I also reviewed a couple hundred books in the genre. So you can kind of filter out some of that AI created stuff to really get to the heart of the genre and get a sort of intellectual analysis of it.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, that's a good resource. And I heard a rumor that you run something called Cyberpunk Day. Tell me about that.
So Cyberpunk Day is something that me and my friends we got together and came up with. It's a trademark day that's celebrated most years in October, um, usually on October 10th because it's like 1010, like binary code. But it's the opportunity for people for content creators in the genre to interact with the audience. And we'll do things like have synthesizer performances together or write stories together or have different lectures and analysis by college professors on what the future looks like. And so we just organize events most years around that. And that kind of brings the community together. With a lot of these like subgenres that are very niche, there's a community that surrounds them because it's kind of difficult to talk about this stuff with like just anyone. And so, we tend to be a very close network.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Is it an in-person event or is it a virtual event?
It's been virtual for a while. There's been talks about moving it to Detroit at one point for in person, but right now it's kind of virtual because everybody's so spread out over the country.
That's a good way to bring things together. Yes, the first time I ever went to like a fantasy and sci-fi con, this just tells you how much I did not know about all the genres that you could read. But there were a ton of steampunk people there, and they were all dressed up in all these costumes, and I was just fascinated. But then, like, my uncle was like, "Yeah, I've been reading this stuff for 30 years," and I said, "Oh, okay. Well, there's so much more to discover." So, yeah, it was super fun. And they would be completely in character, and yeah, so I can imagine
Absolutely.
that this would be just as fun to like geek out with everyone in that field.
Absolutely. I was talking to Kevin Jeter, who came up with the term steampunk, and he came up with it as a joke. He didn't intend for it to. The New York Times asked him, "What do you call this genre?" And he's like, "I don't know, steampunk or something." And it actually took off. And yeah, he was an interesting fellow. He also wrote The Mandalorian season 2, so
Oh, okay.
and Blade Runner too. So he's a neat guy.
Well, fun. Well, thank you so much for being here. And we will have all your links so everyone can find you, Mark Everglade at markeverglade.com, and look up Cyberpunk Day if you'd like to be involved in that. And thank you so much for being here, Mark.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Yeah. See you later. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.